I was perusing the many Michaels aisles full of Christmas ornaments, and while there's so many beautiful things that you can buy, there's always beautiful things you can make too. So I wanted to come up with a tutorial for you that needs nothing more than many of the basic supplies that you have at home. So the tracer, you probably have paper and a printer, your embossing materials, your glue, tape, and scissors, and some twine. We'll get started on our paper. Looking quickly at the embossing materials that all of those things together. I have a set of these perfect pens from Ranger Embossing, and they also are called the Embossed pens, which sounds super exciting. They come in either like clear or black, and I find that if I am going to be writing on a white or light colored piece of paper, then I usually want to opt for the clear, whereas if I'm writing on darker paper or if I'm using black embossing powder, then definitely using the black one is the way to go. For this, I'm going to be using the clear one, and then I have two different colors of Wow embossing powder. You can use any brand that you want. You can use any color that you want. I'm going to use two different colors, and I think that'll look really nice once it's all stuck together to make my paper Christmas tree. I also have twine and tape, which are going to be used together, and that tape is also going to be used to help me close up my paper ornament. So let's get started on this. First, we're going to do our embossing. I'm going to be using the Joy to the World paper Christmas ornament because I think this one's going to look really nice with the two different colors, because the way that I wrote world on the second one here, it's more spread out. So I'm going to do gold for the top part of the tree, red for the middle part, and then gold again for the base to sort of, it's like a embossing sandwich. Now, when you're doing this, you want to think about not trying to do it all at the same time, but doing a little bit at a time. That way you make sure that the pen ink on the paper is still wet enough that your embossing powder will stick really nicely. So I'm going to start off with this first tier, and I'm simply tracing over the gray lines that are there. And you are going to want to trace kind of carefully, because if you don't trace over those lines, they're going to still be there. So make sure that you are tracing over them, and that way they'll get all covered up with your embossing powder. So I'm just going to do the one tier, and then I'm going to put my embossing powder on. I'm simply going to sprinkle the embossing powder on over top of the entire design. I love the sparkles. Gold. And then I'll shake it off onto, really it should just be a piece of paper that I can throw away, but because I am lazy, I only have my other paper Christmas ornament page, but that'll be fine. I'm going to leave this pile here, and I'll use it for my next one as well. One thing I want to look for is, and it hasn't really done it, but any areas where there might be a little bit of embossing powder around, you can wipe that off either with a paintbrush or with a Q-tip. Anything like that will work to just get rid of those extra bits. Once you have finished with one of the colors, take the extra that you have on your sheet and just pour it right back into your embossing container. I love this gold, so I don't want to waste too much of it. I also don't want to make a mess in my workspace, because I know I'll hear about it later. And I'll be the one to clean it up, so two good reasons not to make a big mess. I find that after I have put my embossing ink on, and then I've put the embossing powder on. When I'm shaking it off, it helps to give it just a quick tap. You don't want to tap it too many times because then it will start to fall off of the actual design. So one quick little tap just to get those extra ones off. Otherwise, like I said, you can always just go in with a Q-tip or a paintbrush and just pull away that extra powder. Because if you leave the extra powder there, it is going to set into your design. It's a lot easier to clean it up right now. So now I'll go in and do my red world. Of course, you can use any color you want, any color you have in your collection, and you can use them in any way you want. I just thought it would be fun to try this one with 2 different colors. Yeah, I'm living on the edge, doing extra taps. I find that some of the colors or some areas of paper will tap off easier than others. Often if it's an area that I've touched a lot because of the oils in my hand, more of the embossing powder will stay there. So I mean, if you were super... my life. But if you were super serious about making sure that it's as clean as possible with none of those extra oils, you could always wear rubber gloves. You can also make a mess like this. That's good too. That's good too. This is epic. Now, if your table is nice and clean, you can push it onto a piece of paper and put it back into your container. If there's anything on your table, you're not going to want to do that because then you're going to be contaminating all of your powder. So like any little hairs or stuff like that will get right in there. So only get that powder back up off your table if you know that your table is super clean. And my table used to be super clean, but now not so much. This is just real life crafting here. Okay, so we're all gonna pretend that we don't see this right here, and it's gone. It's all better. Perfect. Okay, so I have some of that extra embossing powder sticking on. I'm gonna use my Q-tip or, like I said, a paintbrush. Oh, I have a paintbrush too. So I'll just use a paintbrush. I find that a paintbrush is a little bit more forgiving with cleaning off that extra powder. I don't really mind if there's extra powder around the edge here. I just don't want it on the design. I feel like doing this sometimes takes more patience than I possess, but it's worth it in the end to take the extra minute and go through and get that extra powder off. And you want to try to avoid hitting the edge of your line like I just did there. I'm essentially showing you what not to do. Do not spill your embossing powder everywhere. Do not put it back in the container. Do not hit the edge you're working on. All the do nots. Okay, so that's relatively clean now. Just try to wipe some of those off. Oh, one more. All right. I want to make sure, especially where it's already tight together, that that part is super clean. So I'm just trying to nudge those little guys in there. It's static that often controls the way that these little embossing powder pigment sections will work. So the more static and the more that you play with it and build up that static electricity, the trickier it's going to be. All right. Now I have every one of the areas embossed, and I can use my embossing gun to heat them up and let them all melt together. Now that it's fully heated and all melted, I'm going to go through and cut each of these out. I want to cut very carefully along the cut lines, and then this one here is a fold guideline. So don't cut along the dotted line, you're going to cut all around the outside here. When you are cutting out your tracer shapes, you want to make sure that you are cutting just on the inside of the black lines. That way you won't have those black lines showing at the very end. It'll look just like a beautiful, nice, crisp, white edge design. One thing that I was thinking is because there are 4 different designs, you could always take that, design your own, and have a child make a really nice, it doesn't even need to be really nice. Please, grandparents love everything that grandkids do. But you could have your child write like something that they love about their grandma or grandpa, and then put the year on it and give that as a little ornament that is personalized and actually has a lot more meaning than maybe it just having someone's last name in the year. I think I'm definitely going to win Christmas by doing that with my kids for my parents. They'll love to have little personalized ornaments like that that actually share feeling rather than just looking pretty. And if they're ugly, they can always just go on the back side of the tree. Now that we have them all cut out, and I went around and made sure that I got all of the black off of the scallop. Halfway through, honestly, I was like, why did you choose to do a scallop on these? But it'll look so nice once it's all put together, so it's worth it. Now we're going to glue and tape the designs together. So you're going to put a little bit of glue here, either with a brush and liquid glue, or you can always use a glue stick or a hot glue gun, but you want to make sure that you get pretty close to that dotted line. That way when you put the two together and you overlap, it won't be sticking up like this. It'll actually be stuck down to make a beautiful little cone for ice cream. You're going to do this for all 3 of your pieces. Once I put the glue on the top, I'm also going to put a piece of tape on the inside just to reinforce it. Because of this heavy-duty cardstock, some of these are a little bit easier to create than others, but the heavy-duty cardstock is what will help it keep its beautiful shape when we're all done. There we go. Now this overlap I noticed isn't absolutely perfect, but I can always come back and just trim those bits off afterwards, so I'm not too worried about that at all. I'm more worried about how glue covered my fingers are getting here. answer for. Just wipe it off. All right, I'm gonna come in and trim off any extra tape or any extra of the underlying scallop that might be showing, and you don't have to be perfect about it. You can always just come in and trim off a whole chunk of it. That way you won't have anything showing up on the top. So I'll check this one. I have a little bit showing underneath. I'll just trim. Oh, this one's glued really well, so I can only trim off a little bit. And next it's going to be time for us to lace these together. Underneath. There we go. I wanted to use something a little bit more substantial than just regular like string or even like cross-stitching thread. So I thought it would be really nice to use some of this baker's twine that of course I've had forever but have never used because it's just too pretty to use. But it's time to use it. So you're going to need 2 feet of this, approximately 24 inches, and it's not that you're going to use all of it, but it's just going to make it so much easier if you have a little bit extra to work with. So pull out approximately 2 rulers of it, have the rest of it fall into your lap, perfect, and give it a trim. Now we're going to make this into a bit of a shoelace next. So taking just a teeny tiny bit of tape, you're going to wrap it around the end of the baker's twine, and I fold it over a little bit, and then I'm just going to try to twirl it as tight as possible. And as I twirl, I'm sticking that tape back on there so I can make a tight little, there we go, sort of like a tight hard bit that I'll be able to thread this through a lot more easily with. This tape's a little bit long, so I'll do some of it and then the rest of it I will just snip right off. This is a bit finicky, just like making sure that you cut really nicely. But again, I promise that all of these little steps, like I'm the last person to do finicky stuff, so if it's not completely necessary, I wouldn't tell you to do it. But again, it will make it so much easier if you take a minute or two just to give your baker's twine these little shoelace ends. Now next we're going to go back to these guys and start to lace them together. You're going to need to cut a tiny, tiny, tiny little hole in the top. And the one that it matters about the most, that it's tiny, is the very top one, because that's the one you're going to see. So for these number 2 and number 3, second and third layer, I'm going to cut one that's a little bit larger, and I cut it in one direction, and then I come along, fold it the other way, just gently, don't actually fold it, and I'll cut the other way. This will give me sort of like a star shape at the top to make it a bit easier to get my string through. So the next one, I'll cut it once this direction and then move it the opposite direction and give it that nice star cut. Now this top one I want to be small because I don't want to be able to see the knot that's happening underneath. So I'm going to be a little bit more careful about making just a tiny hole on the top. And you can even like take your scissor and just push it through a little bit to make it just as large as is needed, but not too much larger. And if you do it from the bottom and the top, just super carefully, it sort of breaks the fibers apart without ripping the paper. Again, using a nice heavy cardstock will also make that much easier. So now I'm going to thread both of these down through. And I know you're probably saying, well, you just could have gone up through the middle. but you could, good luck. Doing this with the shoelace ends is so much easier. So once it's pulled through, you're going to want to make these the same length. So I'll put both the shoelaces together, and then I will just pull at this until I have it even. I'm going to take something through this loop. So let's get some of these things out of my way. And I'm just going to put the scissors through. There we go. And that way I won't accidentally pull it out as I'm putting each of these layers on. So I'll put the scissors through, I'll shift this up, and then I'm going to tie a knot here. And now it can be tricky to tie a knot up inside something, but one little sneak attack trick you can do is to create your loop, and then rather than pulling it tight, take something like a needle or a thin, maybe even like a cooking skewer. I'll just use the end of my paintbrush, and you can move that knot up and down on your string really easily, so you have a lot more control over it. So I'm going to move this not too low. I want to be able to have enough to hook the branch right around there, and then I am going to snug it down and pull it tight. So I want to make sure, just by pulling gently here, that it's tight enough that the knot won't come out the top, because that is going to be absolutely impossible to put back in. On top of this, I'm going to do a second knot just to really make sure. Better safe than sorry. And when I do this knot, I want to make sure that it is on top of the first knot. So again, you can use your trick to shift it exactly where it should be. And then I'm going to hold it all together and pull that so I have a really nice double knot up inside there. It's going to now definitely be secure. So it's time for me to add my second layer on. That's the next largest one. And I'm going to shove both of those ends, in theory, through the hole. So I'll do one, I'll pull it through, and then I just pull this a little bit to the side to give me more space to get the second one through. So once they're both through, again, I make them even in length. And I'm going to pull this up because I want to have it resting just a little bit down from the first one. So this can be a little bit tricky with the knots. If you see in here, it's essentially like knot maybe ½ an inch, and then I have my next layer here. So this is where that makeup brush trick or skewer trick is going to be so helpful. I'll tie my knot up here and stick my makeup brush or skewer or paintbrush through there, and now I've pulled this layer all the way up to the knot, and I'm going to try to get this knot as close as possible to that hole. Shifting, shifting. I'll use my finger and just try to push it up while I pull on this string to tighten it. And now if I check, oh my goodness, it's so cute! I love it! Okay, double knot time though. This is where the real skills come into play. I'm not sure if I have them, but let's see. There's nothing like doing a video to find out if you are capable of doing things or not. I'll just teach people on a video how to watch me drop embossing powder everywhere. All right, I'm trying to get it as close as possible, shoving it up there, and I think that I have a pretty good double knot happening up inside that one. That looks good. It's nice and large. I just want to make sure that these won't fall off if a little person, I know lots of those, comes along and tugs it. So I have my first loop attached to the scissors or anything else to make it nice and secure. Then I have about 1.5 inches down my first set of double loops. And then right on the other side of that, I have my next set of double loops. So this second layer is pretty much stuck. One other thing you could do on this top one, if you're nervous about it falling off at all, would be to thread like a large pretty bead or something like that on the top. And then underneath that bead, you could do a tiny dot of hot glue and just stick that down. And that will help to ensure that this top one doesn't ever come off. And it'll look pretty too. So I'm going to put my last layer on. This is the largest size layer. And again, thread one through. I'll pull that to the side. Gives me a lot of space to get that second piece through. And then I'm going to pull it all the way up into the top. And I can even see what it's going to look like. I might want to shift that one down just a little bit. Pull. So right now I'm just pulling at this knot for the second one to give it a little bit more space in between the two. So it hangs a bit more freely. There we go. And now the third one, I'm going to get that up nice and close. So I'll do my loop knot, stick it through, use my little brush, there we go, shift it up. Oh, this one's looking like it's a little tricky. It doesn't want to shift quite as much. So go slowly and don't rush this knot placement because it is really important for how it all hangs. You want to get it up nice and close. Now I'll use my fingers to shove it up the rest. And again, I'm going to check how it's hanging just to make sure that I have it spaced exactly how I want it. I love it. I love it. I love it too much. I hate when I love things that I do this much, but it's just so cute. And every one of these is going to look different based on the colors that you choose or the embossing powder that you choose. And like I said, it's a little bit finicky, but I just love the way that it looks like decoration, but it also has a beautiful song on it. So it's joy to the world, the Lord has come, and it's so adorable. I'm just admiring it now. Okay, so now that I have that done, I can take this off of my scissor. In theory. Take it off, don't break it. Gentle, think gentle thoughts. There we go. Okay, did it. And underneath here, I am going to trim it off. I've left a little bit in here just in case something happens. If you trim it all the way at the base, it might start to unravel, but keeping about an inch will just help to make sure that none of that happens. So up in here, I have one knot, I have the knot in between the second and the third layers, and I have the knot in between the first and the second. And put all together, I have a cute little scalloped Christmas tree. You can use whatever colors you want. I highly suggest doing all of the embossing on the one page first because that'll stop it from bowing as you heat up the paper. And then you can also choose your colors there, but if you don't like it, you haven't already invested the time in cutting out the scallop, so you can then just print off another one. Make sure you're using a really nice heavyweight cardstock. That'll give you the hang that you're looking for. And when you're cutting out your scallop, that first little bit that's going to be tucked under, don't worry about making that super perfect. You can sort of fudge on that part, but make all those other scallops really nice so that you don't have any black edges. When you're tying your knots, do those beautiful double knots and shift it up by using the trick of a skewer or a paintbrush handle or something else small like that that will allow you to shift that knot up nice and tight. When you cut it off at the end, keep about an inch there just in case something was to happen. And if you don't want to use one of the designs that I've provided in the tracers, you can always just use the blank tracers and have your kids or someone decorate it. You can decorate it just with florals, anything like that, and you will end up with a beautiful, cute little ornament that you made completely from scratch. Hang it onto your tree and enjoy.